Hey guys, thanks for watching the Chen Dynasty. It's Mike Chen. You know, in just over 25 years, China has managed to become a manufacturing powerhouse, holding a lion's share amounting to 25% of worldwide production. Now, it seems like it's almost impossible to find something that didn't come from an assembly line in one of its many mega factories. Just look around you. Your smartphone, probably made in China, because more than 70% of mobile phones sold worldwide are made in China. Your dishware, the furniture in your house, even I'm made in China. Anyway, so many things are made in China that even things you thought were not made in China were made in China. There are tons of examples of this, but because I love food, so in this video, we're gonna talk about 5 food items that you may be surprised were Chinese foods first. First of all, ketchup. This is a fixed condiment to distinctively American dishes like the classic burger and fries and 4th of July hot dogs, but it has its roots in staple Chinese ingredients. Food historians believe that ketchup originated from nuoc mam, fish sauce made from fermented anchovies, which was introduced by Vietnamese fishermen to Chinese seafarers 500 years ago while passing through ports in Southeast Asia. The Chinese called the pungent concoction ketchup, Hokkien for sauce made from preserved fish. Ketchup made its way to western shores when Dutch and British sailors started trading with the Chinese in the 17th century. Sailors, of course, being sailors, they brought back booze, an alcoholic brew of fermented red rice, molasses, and palm wine, and also ketchup. By 1699, ketchup became ketchup and was first mentioned in the New Dictionary of the Terms Ancient and Modern of the Casting Crew as a high-end East India sauce. It became such a hit with the British that soon recipes for ketchup started popping up in England. But ketchup wasn't always the ketchup you know of today, because Chinese ketchup used ingredients such as walnuts, oysters, mushrooms, cloves, ginger, cinnamon, nutmeg, anchovies, and other spices. And tomato wouldn't actually be an ingredient of ketchup until 1812, which came by the way of horticulturist James Mees, who came up with a recipe using tomato pulp, an array of spices, and brandy. And in 1870, American Henry J. Heinz added vinegar to the recipe, really as a preservative. He also added sugar to appeal to the American taste buds, and now 97% of American households have a bottle of ketchup in their pantry. Next up, ice cream is another example of an all-American favorite that have its origins from China. According to Magdalene Toussaint Samat, author of The History of Food, we can all thank China for bringing the best post-breakup cure in a pint there ever was into the world and direct to our fridge. Her research shows that the Chinese created a contraption that uses saltpeter to freeze a mix of snow, buffalo milk, syrup, camphor, flour, and fruits into frozen desserts. There are also recipes that use overcooked rice, honey, and spices. And because ice is a precious commodity, ice cream is only afforded to royalty, like King Tang of Shang, who was believed to have 94 icemen at his beck and call to get ice for the palace, should he, I don't know, get a craving for some smooth sorbet. But ice cream's journey to the West is anything but smooth. There are 2 versions of the story, the most popular one being that Marco Polo encountered ice cream in his travels to Asia. He loved it so much that he brought both technique and recipes with him to Italy and made something that's close to a sherbet. The less summer blockbuster version of events is that ice cream was brought back from China through trade routes across the Arab continents. It was introduced to the Persians, who brought it back to Italy in the 8th century during the Islamic conquests. Number 3, sushi. When talking about sushi, we have to first know that sushi does not mean raw fish. It actually refers to the vinegared rice and whatever filling or topping that came with it that may or may not include raw fish. Sushi was said to have originated between the 5th and 3rd century BC. Back then, because there was of course no refrigerators, people had to find ways to keep their meats fresh. So they would cure their meats and fish and wrap it in rice to preserve its freshness. This was then left to ferment, and people discovered that by doing this, the fish and meats could last months longer than just curing alone. Then when ready to eat, the rice would be discarded and people would eat the fish and meats inside. In the 700s, this method of preserving food then spread to Japan, and of course, there people ate a lot of fish. So the Japanese would do the same thing and use this method to ferment their fish, and loved it so much that the Japanese government even accepted it as a tax payment. Can you imagine every year sending IRS some stinky fish? I would love that. Anyway, like I mentioned, sushi became really popular in Japan, but it died out in China for some reason. Some people think this was because when the Mongolians conquered China, they really preferred red meat and didn't really like fish that much. Anyway, by the 1400s in Japan, people started to eat the fermented rice with the fish, and they couldn't do this before because after months, the rice was just some nasty goo. But people discovered that eating it weeks into the fermentation process instead of months resulted in something absolutely delicious. Because the rice would be a little fermented, it tasted a little vinegary, and that added a lot of flavor. Then in the 1600s, rice vinegar was created from sake, and people found that by adding it to the rice, it created the same sour flavor with no need for fermentation. refrigeration. This was great because then people could eat sushi right away. And of course, still during this time, only the super rich could afford sushi. But shortly after that, sushi became a popular fast food item because workers in Edo or modern-day Tokyo needed something convenient to eat on the go, and because of the Great Fire of Meriki, open flames and cooking with open flames were banned during certain times of the day. And of course, with sushi, no fire is needed. Then, nearly 100 years later, when Tokyo was dominated by food service stalls and people really wanted sushi, this led the way for nigiri, or hand-squeezed sushi, which is what most of us are familiar with today. So sushi became something ordinary to something only really rich people ate to fast food, and now it's super expensive once again. Number 4, kiwi fruit. When I mention kiwis, people will automatically think of New Zealand, right? Which makes sense because that is New Zealand's defining agricultural product, generating over $1 billion in exports every single year. But kiwi fruits were previously called Chinese gooseberries and has its roots, of course, in China, and was known to the Chinese as mi hou tao, were literally the peach deck and charm monkeys. It wasn't until 1904 that a missionary named Isabel Fraser brought the seeds of kiwi fruits from China to New Zealand after she visited mission schools in China. The seeds were planted in 1906, and because people thought the fruit has sort of a gooseberry flavor, they started calling it Chinese gooseberries, which turned out to be a horrible name when they tried to market the fruit to the Americans in the 1950s during the Cold War. In 1959, the name kiwi fruit was brought up, and that stuck. And number 5, booze. In China, alcohol is also called the water of history because stories of liquor can be traced back to almost every period in Chinese history. And the story goes back really far. In fact, the earliest proof of an alcoholic beverage dates back to northern China 9,000 years ago. This cocktail was a mixed drink of fermented rice, honey, hawthorn fruits, and grapes. In ancient China, since alcohol was regarded as a sacred liquid, only when people made sacrificial offerings to heaven and earth or ancestors was it ever used. And after the Zhou dynasty, alcohol was deemed as one of the 9 rites, and every dynasty put great emphasis on alcohol administration, and they set up special ministries to manage alcohol production and alcohol banquets. Luckily, later, along with the development of xenotechnics and brewery, alcohol became an ordinary drink. And this is why there are many customs concerning alcohol that were formed from history and evolved and still play a crucial role in the daily lives of Chinese people. For example, when Chinese people still honor the heavens, or when they're honoring their ancestors, alcohol is always presented as a symbol of respect. Personally, of everything on the list, I am really thankful for ice cream. I mean, if that wasn't invented, we wouldn't have mochi ice cream, or matcha ice cream, or ice cream sundaes, or ice cream floats. Yeah, I think I have a bit of an ice cream problem. But anyway, guys, hopefully you liked this video, and let me know in the comments which of these creations are you most thankful for. Thanks again. See you later.